While America's phones charge overnight and its Tesla vehicles silently accelerate through suburban streets, a profound strategic vulnerability has taken root beneath the surface of the nation's technology-driven economy. China doesn't just influence America's cobalt supply anymore, it effectively controls it. And with electric vehicles now representing the fastest-growing segment of the automotive industry, this dependency has evolved from a trade imbalance to a national security crisis that touches every aspect of modern life. Today, the numbers tell a stark story that defense officials and industry leaders can no longer ignore. The United States imports 76% of its cobalt requirements while producing just 300 tons annually against a national demand of 8,000 tons. But the real shock comes when you examine where this critical metal actually gets processed. China controls 73% of the world's cobalt refining capacity, meaning that even when America sources cobalt from friendly nations like Norway or Finland, much of it has likely passed through Chinese facilities at some point in the value chain. This isn't simply about batteries for consumer electronics anymore. The modern American economy runs on cobalt in ways most citizens never realize. 51% of U.S. cobalt consumption goes into superalloys that power jet engines, keeping both commercial aviation and military aircraft in the sky. Another 25% supports chemical applications across countless industries, while cutting tools and metallic applications account for the remainder. When cobalt supplies become uncertain, the ripple effects cascade through aerospace, defense, manufacturing, and energy sectors simultaneously. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces 74% of the world's cobalt, and Chinese companies have systematically acquired control over approximately 80% of the Congo's cobalt production. This concentration represents one of the most dramatic examples of resource consolidation in modern industrial history. CMOC Group, a Chinese conglomerate, has emerged as the world's largest cobalt producer after surpassing the traditional mining giant Glencore in 2023. Their output doubled from 55,000 tons to 114,000 tons in a single year, fundamentally reshaping global supply dynamics. The scope of Chinese influence becomes even more concerning when examined through a strategic lens.
Chinese companies don't simply mine cobalt. They've built comprehensive vertical integration spanning the entire value chain. They control mining operations through firms like CMOC and Huayou Cobalt, dominate processing and refining with 73% of global capacity, manufacture batteries through companies like CATL, and manage transportation and logistics infrastructure connecting mines to ports. This approach ensures that disrupting any single link in the chain becomes nearly impossible for competing nations. What makes this situation particularly troubling for American policymakers is how it developed through deliberate strategy rather than market accident. China's cobalt dominance traces back to the 2008 Sika Mines deal, an infrastructure for minerals agreement that gave Chinese companies mining rights in exchange for infrastructure development. This deal was recently renegotiated to include up to $7 billion in infrastructure commitments, demonstrating China's willingness to make substantial long-term investments to secure resource access. Between 2000 and 2021, China extended $56.9 billion in credit and aid to transition mineral projects worldwide, with $13 billion specifically targeting cobalt and copper projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The national security implications extend far beyond commercial considerations. Cobalt is essential for numerous defense applications, including gallium arsenide chips in electronic warfare systems, neodymium iron boron magnets in F-35 flight control systems, and antimony in ammunition production. The Department of Defense has acknowledged that 83% of cobalt used in U.S. battery manufacturing passes through Chinese refineries, creating potential vulnerabilities in military energy storage systems and electric vehicle programs. China's recent export restrictions on critical minerals, implemented in retaliation to U.S. tariffs, demonstrate exactly how this dependency can be weaponized for geopolitical leverage. When Chinese exports dropped 27% in May 2025, Cobalt prices immediately increased by 30%, illustrating the market influence that comes with supply chain control. This represents what analysts call a hammerlock over strategic commodities, providing China with instruments of influence that could prevail in international disputes without direct military confrontation.
Perhaps most concerning for America's long-term competitiveness is that Chinese control over cobalt is expected to increase rather than diminish. By 2030, Chinese companies are projected to control 46% of global mined supply, representing a 3% increase from 2023 levels. The top two producing countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Indonesia, will contribute 84% of total cobalt production, with Chinese companies controlling significant portions of both. The DRC alone is projected to produce 204,000 tons in 2030, with Chinese companies controlling 109,000 tons, representing 53.5% of production from the world's dominant source. Meanwhile, Western alternatives remain severely limited. North America currently has zero domestic cobalt refining capacity for battery-grade materials, leaving the region entirely dependent on overseas processing dominated by China. While companies like Electra Battery Metals are attempting to build North America's first cobalt refinery, these efforts represent only a small fraction of the processing capacity needed to meaningfully reduce Chinese dependency. The challenge facing American industry and policymakers isn't simply about finding alternative suppliers. It's about confronting a systematic approach to resource control that took decades to construct. China's strategy employed infrastructure for minerals agreements, strategic oversupply to make non-Chinese operations uneconomical, comprehensive vertical integration, and sophisticated market manipulation tactics. Reversing this dependency requires equally comprehensive planning and substantially more capital investment than current efforts suggest. As electric vehicle adoption accelerates and battery storage becomes increasingly critical for grid stability, America's cobalt dependency will only deepen unless dramatic action materializes quickly. The window for addressing this vulnerability continues to narrow as Chinese companies expand their operations and Western alternatives struggle with financing, regulatory hurdles, and competitive disadvantages against state-subsidized Chinese operations. The cobalt supply chain represents more than a trade issue or even an economic challenge. It's become a test of whether democratic nations can maintain strategic autonomy in an increasingly connected but contested global economy.
The choices made in the next few years will determine whether America enters the next decade with greater independence or deeper dependence on a strategic rival that has already demonstrated its willingness to use economic leverage for geopolitical advantage. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the clock continues ticking toward an even more precarious future.